on a replacement structure, how do we meet that reliability, redundancy, and resiliency? The replacement scenarios would remove the existing bridge in its entirety, from end to end. Okay, so there would essentially be no reuse of the existing bridge elements, as the study currently is indicating. Also, redundancy is introduced by the implementation of not just a single swing span or single movable span to support the 4 tracks, but it will have 2 independently operated movable spans. And they would be dual movable spans that would more often than not operate in unison, but they would have the ability to operate independently of one another as well as it relates to how those structures get maintained and inspected. There would be all new bridge spans, all new bridge piers. It would have a modern mechanical and electrical system that would allow it to open and close reliably. And then there would be new rail systems, such as the overhead catenary system, track, signal system, etc., to really kind of complete that package. For the rehabilitation scenario, the overall project estimated costs at this time are in the $400 to $450 million range. And again, that's to extend that service life another 100 years. That's just not to go in and do a little work and then wait for the next rehab. This is a full-blown rehabilitation that would be expected to take upwards of 54 months in order to implement. You may ask, well, why does that take so long? Well, again, we have to make sure that we keep the bridge open for both waterway users and rail traffic during that process. So when you take all those things into account, the schedule is presented as 48 to 54 months. In the vertical clearance, the navigation clearances, from a vertical clearance perspective, there is no change. So the swing span that's out there today essentially would be the swing span under a rehabilitation scenario. So there's no change in the navigation clearances, both horizontally and vertically, and there's no change to the alignment of the channel as it relates to the Strapolino Bridge. Part of our study also looked closely at what's happening below the mudline in the waterway. That's a critical element, again, to promoting resiliency as it relates to protection against extreme storm events. We've looked at traffic impacts, rail traffic, waterway traffic, likewise vehicular traffic and pedestrian traffic over on Water Street under a construction scenario. All of those elements very important into how we're evaluating those rehabilitation and replacement needs. Right-of-way and utility impacts are also evaluated. And then, as I mentioned before, construction staging. And what that means is, how does a rehabilitation or a replacement get implemented without compromising rail traffic and waterway traffic? And if it does, how do those impacts get mitigated? In all these replacement scenarios, the navigation clearances are improved. And by that I mean that the horizontal clearance of the movable span replacement alternatives improves both horizontally and vertically, and particularly vertically when the span is in the closed position. Right now the vertical clearance is right around 16 feet. In all scenarios, that number goes up. Likewise, the horizontal clearance improves as well, and that's just by virtue of how the structure would likely get built. So let's go in here and look at these replacement alternatives. And again, if you're comfortable with the nomenclature of the numbers or the names, you can feel free to refer to those in any manner that you like. So for example, option 2G was one of those options that came out of the matrix. But what option 2G is, it's a trunnion bascule bridge. And all that means is it's a bridge that pivots at one end and rotates upward, as we can see in the next slide. So what happens is, I don't have a pointer, I'll have to go to the screen. It pivots about a point and it allows for navigation traffic to pass beneath it. It has a cost range of around $350 to $400 million. Construction schedule, 36 to 42 months. And all of these are conceptual numbers and are being refined, so keep that in mind as well. The vertical clearance, when the span's open, provides 60 feet minimum. It has an ability to provide about 80 to 100 feet of horizontal clearance. And because of where the new bridge piers would be placed, it does offer a better alignment with the Straffolino Bridge across the waterway. As we can see here, just in comparison, and so you'll see a series of these for all of the different replacement alternatives as well. So on the bottom here we have an elevation view of the existing walk bridge. And then above it we have an elevation view of a potential span arrangement for this structure type that's a trunnion bascule. And then in the open position, then you can see what it looks like, how it pivots about the one end. This option, 3A, is a lot like the other one, but it's a different movable span type, and to the naked eye you wouldn't know it, because all of the differences are down below. But what happens is that in this particular scenario, we've moved that pivot point to the west side of the channel. On option 2G, it was on the east side. In this case, as we can see here, when the span is open, it opens from the other direction. It provides very similar navigation clearances in the open position and in the down position as well. And just like the other one, because of the greater span length that we have, we get better alignment with the Straffolino Bridge. Its cost is around $300 to $350 million. Construction schedule about that 3-year timeline, and the navigation clearances again are very similar to that earlier bascule option. And here you can see the difference again with the pivot location over on the west end, and in the open position may look like that. Okay. Option 4S, this is a rolling bascule truss. So on the other two options, it was more of a low-profile superstructure. In this option, we have a truss structure. And what we did was, rather than on the walk bridge, where all the truss is below the railroad tracks, we actually flipped it over. And so all the truss is above the railroad tracks. And what that does is that improves the navigation clearance when the bridge is in the closed position. So what once was 16 feet of vertical clearance could go up to about 27 feet of vertical clearance when you have a structure like this. And so, like the other ones that were girder bridges, this truss bridge also pivots about a point and rotates open to allow for navigation to pass beneath it. It has a cost of about $350 to $400 million, again about a 3-year construction timeline. When the span is open, again it provides 60 feet of vertical clearance. Horizontal clearance, though, on this particular structure goes up to upwards of 170 feet. So it really opens up the waterway, gives a clear shot between Straffolino Bridge and the walk bridge. And then we looked at two, last images here. Oh, you're okay. Yeah, we can see on this one. Yeah, let's go to the next one. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So again, just a good comparison, give you a sense of scale on the differences between the two as it relates to the navigation clearances that they provide and the ability to better align the channel. We also looked at different vertical lift bridges, and vertical lift bridges are highlighted by towers at either end of the movable span that guide that structure upward and downward during its span movements. On the next slide, we looked at this is the first vertical lift span that we looked at. It was kind of what I would call a shorter vertical lift span. It's commensurate in span length to the option that you just saw, 4S. But this option takes it to a different movable span type, that vertical lift bridge. And in the open position then, it just raises and is guided by both towers at the end. It has a cost of about $500 to $550 million. Construction time, a little bit more than 3 years. It has navigation clearances again at 60 feet, and so that kind of sets the upper limits of the towers. Horizontally, we can provide about 140 feet maximum, and then again, because the navigation channel or the navigation clearance horizontally is increased, we have the ability then to improve that channel alignment. And then lastly, when we see this span again in comparison with the walk bridge, you can see the towers at either end, and then when the span is raised to allow for navigation, that 60 feet of vertical clearance. And again, in all of the replacement scenarios, the pivot pier of the swing span would be removed. And then lastly, we have option 11C, which is a vertical lift span that essentially spans the waterway. And some of you may ask, well, why would you do that? Well, there are reasons why we looked at this scenario. That is about a 250-foot span, and it places the new piers behind the rest piers of the swing span that you'll see here in a second. So when the span is up, it takes on that configuration. It's a large structure that costs about $550 to $600 million. Construction timeline of upwards of 48 months. Navigation clearance here horizontally goes up to about 200 feet. And again, it really opens up the waterway and provides better alignment with the Stroffolino Bridge. And here again, when I talked about on the next image here, the towers for the lift span are on the west side and the east side of the existing swing span. So it completely opens up the waterway.